least in part by how much you utilize your lower back in the lift, and how often you can sort of take your lower back out of the equation, or at least minimize the extent to which you are asking it to move the loads that you're placing upon your body. And so for me, reverse band box squats allow me to do that. They allow me to focus on other muscle groups when squatting, muscle groups that are not dominant in my squat. And this is particularly helpful for me because I'm a big believer in weakness training and doing variations of main movements in which you train down to the lowest, what I call the lowest common denominator. And the principle is pretty simple. So if you perform a lift and let's say at 80% your technique starts to break down on that lift, you start compensating. Let's say you have a weakness in a particular muscle group. Let's say you're bench pressing, for instance, and at around 80%, your elbows start to really flare, and you start to lose a lot of strength because you start to lose technique because, let's say, you have weak triceps, and your triceps aren't any longer strong enough to keep your elbows tucked in a position that they should be in, and so you compensate. You start utilizing your front delts more. You start utilizing your chest more to complete the lift. If that's the case with you, my suggestion is always to try and find a way to train down to the lowest common denominator. So train just under a point at which that technique really starts to break down, and to use this as sort of like accessory work. So you want to do heavy work, heavy training in order to maintain strength levels, and there is going to be some breakdown in technique, but you want to train down to that lowest common denominator in order to build it back up, okay? If most of the heavy training I'm doing involves a breakdown in technique, in other words, if for a particular lift all of my heavy work is being done in such a way that I am eliding over a particular weakness, well, that weakness is never going to be developed unless you're doing isolation movements as accessory exercises, single joint movements that are going to address that particular muscular weakness. You can address it in that fashion, or you can address it within the lift itself, and that involves treating that lift as an accessory exercise. Anyway, getting back to reverse band box squatting, what reverse band box squatting allows me to do is it allows me to train down to the lowest common denominator. It allows me to squat with a neutral spinal position, a more vertical torso position, and focus on glute, quad, and hamstring recruitment, and really just not utilize my lower back like I might with a max or a near max back squat. And so I strengthen those muscle groups that I perhaps start to shift away from and rely less on when I'm doing near max back squatting. And the hope there is that I'm going to build those up and develop those. Another approach to doing this is to do, say, if you have a leverage-based sticking point or a mini max, if you want to put it in those terms. Another way of addressing this is to do partial range of motion training, and reverse band training is similar to partial range of motion training in that as you enter into a more biomechanically advantaged position in relation to the weight you're trying to lift, the bands deload and the weight gets harder for you. So it's similar to a partial range of motion lift, with the exception being that with a partial range of motion lift, so let's say if you're doing it a pin squat in which you're several inches above parallel, the difference between the two is you are given the opportunity to produce speed at the bottom portion of that lift that will allow you to work through and accelerate through what has now become the heaviest portion of the lift and maybe not the hardest portion of the lift. How do I use my reverse bands? How do I determine how strong my reverse bands are? Well, it really has nothing, in my opinion, to do with the bands themselves, okay? So if the band takes off 100 pounds, 200 pounds, 300 pounds, nothing, 0 pounds at a given point in the lift. I don't really care about any of that stuff. What I care about is the differential in the variable resistance being provided. So I care about the difference between what the band is taking off in the bottom portion of the lift and in the top portion of the lift. And in the reverse band training that I've seen done, usually the differential that you want for max or near max training is going to be around 20 to 30%, 30% at the very most, and that is a lot. For me, I use reverse bands that take off 20 or 30 pounds at the top, and usually about 100 to 120 at the bottom. So there's usually about a 20-pound gap, and for me, I'm a raw box squat off a low box. I don't know what my max is, but I'm guessing that's like 25% for me. Maybe I'm sort of throwing a number out here, but it's around 20 to 25%. And the differential is, because the differential is going to be 80 to 100, 120 pounds, something like that, or most likely 100. But anyway, I want to find a differential that fits with my force curve, okay? And the way in which you determine that is when you do a max or a near max reverse band box squat, to use this example, do you have to continually put forth maximal force in order to maintain the same speed throughout the lift? So when you watch my reverse band squats, I don't accelerate towards the top, okay? And that's not because I'm relaxing towards the top. I'm still pushing as hard as possible towards the top, okay? But the bands that are deloading are disallowing me to accelerate towards the top portion of the movement. And that's really what you're looking for here. You're just looking for a variation in band tension that will conform to your particular force curve. All right, that's a little bit on reverse band squatting. There is plenty more that I could say, but those are some of the reasons why it works for me. It's not the sole reason why I've become a really strong squatter in my weight class, but it has definitely helped. It can help for raw squatters. Depends on your individual needs. If you need some of the things that I've addressed over this video, then maybe it's for you. If not, then more squatting is always a good prescription for whatever maladies you're suffering with. That's it. I'll have maybe another one of these soon. If you like it, comment. Talk to you soon.